I remember the smell first. Jet fuel and rain-soaked concrete. It clung to everything. Your clothes, your hair, even your skin after you showered. When I stepped off the transport plane at Da Nang in '66, the air felt like it was trying to drown me. Thick, hot, wet. But the sky was clear. I was 24. Fresh flight suit, clean helmet, every checklist memorized. We thought we were part of something noble. Stopping communism, saving lives, defending freedom. All the slogans they printed on briefing folders and chapel posters. And I believed it. At least for a while. The first time I saw Vietnam from the air, I thought it was beautiful. Dense, endless green, like the world had no edges. Rivers curling through mist. Villages like tiny grey fingerprints pressed into the jungle. From up there, everything was orderly, predictable. You could almost forget there were people under those clouds. Our squadron flew F-105s, Thunder Chiefs. Big, loud, temperamental beasts that rattled your bones when you throttled up. We flew high, dropped low, screamed over ridges like thunder in a bottle. Every mission was the same. Coordinates, payload, altitude, call sign. The ground wasn't our concern, just the map, the numbers, the targets. First mission, Ho Chi Minh Trail. They told us the target was enemy supply activity. That was the phrase they used. Enemy supply activity. It could mean trucks, a cache, a campfire, anything. We rolled in at dawn. I remember the sun coming up over the ridge, the way the canopy turned gold. When I released the bombs, the whole valley lit up like a sunrise from hell. Afterward, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, maybe. Pride, even. We'd hit the target clean, came home to cheers and a beer waiting on the wing. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the light. Not the explosion, just the way it bloomed. Too soft. Too human. War from the air is clean, efficient. You don't see the screams, you don't smell the bodies. You hear your own breathing through the mask, the hum of the radio, the metallic click of switches. The sky becomes your whole world, and down there is just coordinates. I wrote letters home after every mission. Told my wife about the weather, the food, the camaraderie. I told her I was safe, that I was helping people. That was half true. I wanted to believe it. Sometimes, when we flew at dusk, the jungle canopy would reflect the last orange light and look almost peaceful. Almost like Kansas in the summer. Fields and rivers, glowing before dark. And in those moments, I felt something I couldn't explain. Maybe awe. Maybe guilt. Maybe both. One of the older pilots, Captain Larkin, once said, "The sky doesn't lie. The ground does." I didn't know what he meant then, but I learned soon enough. Our missions started getting closer to populated areas. The briefings were still clean, clinical. Suspected enemy depot, hostile activity zone. You drop, pull up, check your instruments, and climb away. You don't look back. But one day, after a low run near Quang Ngai, I caught a glimpse. Roofs burning. And between the smoke, something moved. Tiny figures. Running. That was the first time I realized the ground wasn't empty. I told myself it was enemy infrastructure. That's what the map said. That's what command said. But the next morning, when I stepped onto the tarmac, I couldn't help thinking, if the ground is lying to us, maybe the sky is too. I kept flying, of course. That's what we did. We followed orders. We dropped the bombs. We came home and cleaned the canopies. The routine was the only thing that kept us from asking questions. Years later, People asked what it was like to fly in that war. And I tell them this. The flying was easy. It was everything after that that got hard. The sky was the easy part. The rest of it never left the ground. You start to notice patterns after a while. Not in the missions themselves, those were chaos dressed up as order, but in the briefings, in the words they used. Enemy activity, strategic target, necessary action. They sounded official, confident, clean, like each phrase came with its own built-in excuse. But the longer you fly, the more those words start to echo inside you, like empty shells. The first time I questioned one of those targets, my CO looked at me like I'd insulted his mother. I told him the coordinates seemed too close to a village cluster. He said, "Son, the only villages out there are VC with rice bowls." And that was the end of it. We weren't supposed to see the ground anyway. The ground was for other people. Our job was altitude, speed, payload, return. Anything outside that wasn't our business. Still, curiosity has a way of getting you in trouble. Between runs, I'd sometimes go out to the perimeter fence, just to feel the ground under my boots again. Out there you could hear things. Crickets, wind, sometimes laughter from the local workers at the base. It reminded you there was still a world that didn't sound like engines. One afternoon a reporter came through, American, big camera, clean boots. He asked if he could ride along. They said no, classified. But he hung around anyway, asking questions. He asked me one I've never forgotten. He said, "What's it like to bomb people you can't see?" I didn't answer. I just walked away. But that question stuck. It got in my head like a splinter. Because that was the truth of it. We couldn't see them. Not really. The enemy, the civilians, the difference between them, all hidden by clouds, smoke, and the story we told ourselves. After a few months, it all blended together. Mountains, valleys, coordinates, same targets, different days. You come back from a run and the ground crew claps you on the back. They hand you a beer, slap your shoulder, say, "Hell of a job out there, Lieutenant." And for a few hours you believe them. Then one morning you see the aftermath. We'd hit a suspected convoy route near the border. The clouds broke just long enough for me to glimpse the ground. Huts burning, black smoke rising. The coordinates had been wrong. It wasn't a convoy. It was a village. I told myself I didn't know, that I couldn't know. But deep down, I did. After we landed, I went to the mess and sat there, staring at my hands. The same hands that moved the joystick, the same fingers that pressed the button. And I couldn't stop thinking. Maybe the button didn't know what side it was on either. That night, I wrote a letter home, but I didn't write about what I'd seen. I wrote about the rain and how it made the runway shimmer like glass. I wrote about how the jungle looked alive, like it was breathing. I wrote lies, because the truth wouldn't fit on paper. We used to joke that we were fighting for hearts and minds. You hear that enough times it becomes white noise, background hum behind the engines. But I started to wonder whose hearts we were fighting for, because it sure wasn't the ones down there. Every time I pulled back on the stick, the world below turned into a green blur. A whole country shrinking to the size of a memory. And I started to feel smaller with it. Like the higher I climbed, the less I belonged to anything human. Command said we were making progress. They always said that. But the truth was, we weren't fighting for ground. We were fighting the ground itself. Every hill, every tree, every patch of dirt seemed to resist us. And the people? They just kept rebuilding, over and over. We destroyed the same villages 3 times, and somehow every time we flew over again, there were roofs again. Smoke from cooking fires, children running. That's when I realized the war wasn't about winning or losing. It was about repeating. The ground kept coming back, and I kept pretending I couldn't see it. One day my crew chief told me, "Sir, your eyes look different." He was right. After that, I stopped looking down altogether. You can't lose what you refuse to see. At least, that's what I told myself. But the ground never forgets. It just waits for you to remember. There's a sound the jungle makes after a bombing run. Not the explosion itself, that's easy. It's what comes after. A silence so complete it feels like the air forgot how to breathe. We used to say the jungle healed fast. That was the lie that made the job easier. We told ourselves the trees would grow back, that the villages would rebuild, that the sky would eventually forgive us. But that day, I stopped believing in the sky. It was supposed to be a routine strike. Enemy logistics, the briefing said. The target grid was marked red on the map. I still remember the code, Delta 25. We'd hit that area before. It was supposed to be clear of civilians. Weather was bad, visibility near zero. They said, trust the instruments. Drop on the mark. When I came in low, I could feel the turbulence kicking the fuselage. Clouds swallowed everything. I couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the horizon. Just the faint green glow of the altimeter, the hum of the engines. Then the call came over the radio. Release now. I pressed the switch. Watched the payload counter tick down. 6 bombs gone in under 10 seconds. The plane jolted upward from the weight loss, and I pulled away, banking through the cloud. I didn't see what they hit. Not then. The next morning, we flew recon over the same area. The clouds had cleared, and that's when I saw it. The jungle was gone, just ash and mud. You could still see the outlines of where houses had been, rectangles in the dirt like ghosts of walls. And there, in the middle of it all, was a single tree still standing. Beneath it, a boy, barefoot, covered in soot. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even moving. He just stood there, staring at the sky. For a second, I thought he was looking at me. I don't know how long I circled that place. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for my wingman to ask if I'd lost comms. I told him no. I just didn't know what to say. When we landed, I went straight to the ops tent. Told the CO there'd been a mistake. That the target wasn't military. He didn't even look up from his clipboard. He said, "You followed orders? That's all that matters." I walked out before he finished talking. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boy, standing there under the tree, looking at the sky like he was waiting for it to explain itself. The next day, I asked for a transfer. Command said no. Too much paperwork. Too many missions left on my logbook. So I kept flying. But something in me stayed down there, in that burned-out village that didn't even have a name anymore. After that, the world below stopped looking like geography. It started looking like guilt. Every smoke trail, every broken roof, every crater. I could see faces now. Faces where there used to be coordinates. One night I heard a maintenance crew joking about the turkey shoot we'd done earlier that week. They didn't mean it cruelly. It was just the language of survival. But I walked out of the hangar and vomited behind the barracks. That's when I realized I didn't belong to the squadron anymore. Or maybe I didn't belong to myself. You tell yourself you can't carry it all. That it's just one village, one mistake, one bad coordinate. but deep down, you know it's not the only one. You start to see patterns again. The kind that can't be fixed by pretending not to look. I started keeping a small notebook. Not for missions, not for reports. Just for names. Names I remembered from briefings. Villages we'd hit. Coordinates I never wanted to forget. It wasn't much. Just ink and guilt. But it was all I could do. One of the crew chiefs caught me writing once. He said, "What's that for?" I told him, "It's so I don't forget." He said, "Forget what?" And I said, that there's still people under those clouds. He didn't ask again. That was the last time I ever looked at a map without seeing ghosts. They say the hardest part is leaving the war behind. But the truth is, you never really do. You just change skies. I came home in '68. My tour was over. They stamped my papers, handed me a folded flag, and told me I'd done my part. That was it. No questions, no explanations, no debriefs that weren't typed in triplicate. The flight back felt longer than the whole war. No radio chatter, no target calls, just the sound of air pressure humming in the cabin. Half the men slept. The other half stared out the window like the clouds were hiding something. Maybe they were. When we landed at Travis Air Force Base, the world looked too clean. No mud, no smell of kerosene, no insects crawling over the coffee mugs. Just asphalt, flags, and silence. And a few protesters with signs. They weren't shouting at me, not directly, but it still felt like it. Like they could see the smoke that hadn't washed off. I didn't blame them, not really. How could they understand something I barely understood myself? They told me to go home. Home. That word didn't mean much anymore. My wife met me at the terminal. She smiled, or tried to. But she looked different, older somehow, like the war had been sitting next to her too. She asked if I was hungry. I said no. We didn't talk much on the drive. The radio was playing some protest song. She turned it down without saying a word. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. No engines, no rain on the tin roof, no distant thump of artillery. Just quiet. And that quiet, it sounded wrong. Every time a car passed outside, I'd flinch. Every time the wind hit the window, I'd think of the jungle breathing back. In the morning, I made coffee and stared out the kitchen window. The neighborhood was neat. Trimmed lawns, mailboxes straight in a row. But in the puddles on the street, I saw reflections that didn't belong there. The sky from Vietnam. The smoke. The boy under the tree. People asked what it was like over there. I told them it was hot. That was all. What else could I say? That I dropped fire on strangers and came home expecting applause. That I still smelled kerosene in the rain. They didn't want to hear that. They wanted stories they could nod to, thank you for your service, and move on. So I learned to speak their language again. Barbecues, ball games, the weather. Small talk that didn't leave stains. But sometimes, when someone would say, "It must have been an adventure," I'd feel something break loose inside. Adventure. That word never felt so cruel. I tried to go back to flying, commercial work. But the sky didn't feel clean anymore. Every cloud looked like smoke. Every shadow felt like a target. I'd catch myself gripping the throttle too tight, waiting for an order that wasn't coming. So I quit. After that, the days started blending together. Coffee, silence, a few letters to old squadron mates that were never answered. I heard some of them didn't make it. Not in the war. After it. Sometimes the war just waits. I remember one afternoon, I walked into the garage and found my old helmet in a box. The visor was cracked, the paint chipped. I held it for a while, not out of nostalgia, but to remind myself it was real, that all of it actually happened. My wife came in and asked if I wanted to go out to dinner. I said no. She said, "You can't stay in here forever." And I said, "I already did." I didn't mean to sound cold. It's just, when you come back, you don't really return. You land in a place that looks familiar, but you're a stranger there. You smile, nod, shake hands, pay bills. But a part of you is still circling over that jungle, looking for something you can't bomb back into order. They called it re-entry, but the truth is, I never landed. The strangest thing about coming home is realizing the war never came with you. It's like stepping out of a nightmare and finding everyone else still asleep. In town, people went to work, mowed their lawns, planned vacations. The evening news mentioned the war between the weather and the sports. Just another story in the middle of the world's routine heartbeat. But every time I heard Vietnam, I'd stop breathing. Even the sound of the word hurt. It felt like someone was calling me from under the ground. One Sunday, I went to church. The pastor gave a sermon about forgiveness, about leaving the past behind. He said, "Some things only God can carry." And for a moment, I almost believed him. Then someone in the pew behind me whispered, "That's one of those pilots, you know." I didn't go back after that. I tried to blend in. I got a job at a small airfield outside town teaching kids how to fly. Most of them were too young to understand what we'd been fighting for. Some didn't even know where Vietnam was on a map, and I didn't blame them. They were born into a peace we'd already spent. Every few months I'd see old footage on TV, the protests, the marches, the generals giving speeches. I'd hear them talk about mistakes made and lessons learned, as if it was all just a bookkeeping error. They never showed the villages, never the faces, never the boy under the tree. We erased those faces faster than we erased the coordinates. Once, a man at the airfield asked me if I was proud of my service. I didn't know how to answer. Pride wasn't the word I'd kept. I told him I was lucky to come home. He smiled and said, "That's what matters." But it didn't. Not really. One night I got a letter from an old crew chief. He wrote that he'd started drinking too much, couldn't hold down a job. Said every time he closed his eyes he heard the release tone, that short beep before the bombs dropped. He ended the letter with, "You ever feel like you left the best parts of yourself over there?" I didn't write back, because I didn't know what to say. Sometimes I wonder if forgetting is the real victory. Not winning, not losing, just forgetting. Wiping the slate clean, convincing yourself it was all for something. Maybe that's how a country moves on. But I couldn't forget. Every time it rained, I smelled fuel and rot again. Every thunderclap sounded like distant artillery. And every 4th of July, when fireworks lit up the sky, I saw tracers cutting through the dark. My wife stopped asking about the war. She knew I'd never answer. But sometimes she'd catch me staring at the TV when the news mentioned Southeast Asia. She'd put her hand on mine and say, "It's over." And I'd whisper, "Not for them." By then, America had moved on to new things. New headlines, new enemies, new wars. Vietnam became a paragraph in a textbook, something kids memorized, then forgot after the exam. Once, I went to a small veterans gathering. Not the kind with flags and speeches. Just a few men in folding chairs behind a diner. We didn't talk much about battles. Mostly we talked about silence. How hard it was to explain to anyone what it felt like to come back to a world that didn't need you anymore. One of them said, "The country moved on. But we didn't. And we all nodded, because that was the first honest thing anyone had said in years. The funny thing is, when I close my eyes, I can still see the map. All those red-marked zones, coordinates, names that blurred together. But what stays clearest isn't the missions. It's the moments in between. The silence before a strike, the sound after. The country forgot its war. But the war never forgot us. It still whispers. In rain, in engines, in the spaces where no one's listening. It's been decades now. Sometimes I forget how many. Time doesn't move in years for me. It moves in echoes. I live near the coast now. There's a small dock, a single boat, and a view of the horizon that never quite sits still. On calm mornings, I go out before sunrise. Just me, the mist, and the slow sound of water against the hull. And for a while, it's peaceful. But peace isn't silence. Silence is what comes when everything else is gone. And that's what I've learned to live with. The kind of quiet that hums under the skin, that never truly lets you rest. Sometimes, the wind shifts just right, and I catch the faintest smell of fuel. Jet fuel. And for a moment, I'm 23 again. Up in that cockpit, my hands trembling on the stick, pretending I wasn't afraid. Pretending I knew what we were doing. I've kept a few things from those days. A pilot's patch, a small torn notebook, and a photo, black and white, edges curled, of a village I took from the air before we bombed it. I don't even know why I kept it. Maybe as proof. Proof that once there was something down there worth remembering. People say time heals, but I think it just buries. It covers the wounds in new layers of noise, traffic, television, progress. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the pulse beneath it. Still hear the war breathing. Chapter 20. I used to think guilt was the enemy. Now I know it's memory that does the real work. It keeps you honest. Keeps you from disappearing completely. I've met other vets over the years. Some still angry, some lost. Some pretending they never went. We talk sometimes. Not about battles, not anymore. Mostly about small things. Fishing, weather, grandkids. But in between, there's that look in the eyes. The flicker that says, I still hear it too. The world moved on. It built cities, tore them down, sent men to the moon, made wars that looked cleaner on television. But the kind of war we fought, the one where the line between right and wrong dissolved in the rain, that one doesn't leave your bones. I still dream of the boy under the tree sometimes. He's always there, small, still, waiting for something I can't give him. And when I wake, I reach for my dog tags like they're going to explain what he was doing there. They never do. You learn to live with ghosts. You stop expecting them to leave. You start making room for them at the table, in the mirror, in the silence before sleep. One night, my son asked me if I was proud of serving. He meant well. He teaches history, and they were covering Vietnam at his school. He said, they called it the first war America lost. I told him, son, we didn't lose. We just left. He looked at me strange, like he was trying to understand. But I think what I meant was, we left pieces of ourselves there and never went back to get them. He asked if I'd ever go back, visit the places I flew over. I said no. You don't visit graves you helped dig. I see documentaries sometimes, clean narrations, archival footage, the same old generals explaining strategies like it was all chess pieces and coordinates. But they never show what happens after you come home, after the medals tarnish, after the parades end. They never show the man standing alone in his kitchen at 3 a.m., staring out the window, waiting for a war that's already over to stop echoing inside him. That's the thing no one tells you. You don't come back from a war like that. You just return to where the world kept going without you. And you learn to live in between. People see me now. Grey hair, slow walk, the easy smile of an old man. They don't see the pilot, the one who counted coordinates instead of names, the one who came home with a uniform but without a war to believe in anymore. Sometimes, when the sea is still and the light hits just right, I think maybe the past forgave me. Then the wind changes and I hear it again. That low, far-off rumble that sounds like thunder but isn't. That's when I remember. I didn't come back from the war. I just came back without it. And maybe that's the difference. The war ended for everyone else. But for me, it's just quieter now. The man who came back without a war, he's still here. Still trying to remember what peace is supposed to feel like. If you've made it this far, thank you. These stories take time to tell, and even longer to understand. You've just walked through the memories of men who were never supposed to be remembered. If their voices meant something to you, if even one line stayed behind when the sound faded, don't let it disappear. Give this video a like, share it with someone who still believes history belongs to the living, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. Every episode here is another page, another life, another truth pulled out of the smoke. Drop a comment too, not for the algorithm, but for the conversation. Tell me what you felt, or what you remember hearing from your own fathers, grandfathers, uncles, or friends. That's how these memories stay alive. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's keep turning the pages together.